Welcome to the Safety Doc Podcast with author, radio host, and nationally recognized safety expert, Dr. David Parodi. Join us each week as we discuss the best and most bizarre practices in safety preparation and crisis response. Follow Dr. Parodi on Twitter at SafetyPhD. And remember, the truth will keep you safe.
My name is Dr. David Parodi, and welcome to the Safety Doc Podcast. In the past, we've talked about Hurricanes Irma and Harvey, Hurricane Florence, and now Hurricane Dorian, and a different perspective of what's happening with Hurricane Dorian, the impact on the Bahamas, the truth, the tragic truth of the devastation of what is happening right now in the Bahamas. So with me today, I have Herman Parodi. I like the last name because it's like Parodin, right? So Herman Parodi, Shaylin Slulcevis, and Shaylin, you can correct what I just can you say your last name for us?
Yes, no problem, David. It's Shaylin Sluzalis.
Oh, Shaylin Sluzalis. Yes, I've got it. Okay. And Katie Pechon. Katie is doing work with Triton Relief, and in the past it was Cajun Navy Relief. Katie's been doing so much terrific work for so many years in disaster relief, and I wrote about it in my book, School of Errors, Rethinking School Safety in America, the importance of civilian rescue forces and people like Katie. So let's get some background, because you're going to listen to this show right now, but you're probably going to listen to it later. You're going to watch it later. And we have a tendency to conflate and to blend our memories. Let's just talk about the Bahamas. I'm going to give you a background. So the Bahamas extend 760 miles from the coast of Florida on the northwest, almost to Haiti on the southeast. The group of islands consists of 700 islands. Okay, 700 islands, 30 are uninhabited. So we have many islands that compose the Bahamas. Nassau is what we typically think about when we think of the Bahamas. It has 230,000 people. The Bahamas in total has just under 400,000 people, so more than half of the residents live on Nassau. You think of Paradise Island, that's all kind of part of that Nassau complex right there. About 60 miles to get there from Miami. So Hurricane Dorian on September 1st, 2019, the eye of the hurricane made landfall Abaca Islands, maximum sustained winds of 185 miles an hour. So right there in the Bahamas. Now, one of the strongest hurricanes ever, but what was unique about Hurricane Dorian is how slowly it moved, about a mile per hour. Now, imagine that. You're getting ground down by 185 mile an hour winds, which are whipping debris and whipping waves all over the islands, and that's moving at about 1 mile per hour. So it's 2 days that you're getting pummeled, and everything is getting ground down by this ferocious hurricane. So the devastation is unimaginable to a scale that we have never seen before. As of Monday, September 9th, NBC News reported 50 people had died in the Bahamas. But we have thousands of people missing. And from what I've been gathering from people who have had contact with Bahamas, a discussion that Katie and I had earlier, this number of fatalities is likely to grow into the thousands. So when you're listening to this, it might already well be into the thousands. Most infrastructure is destroyed, if not heavily damaged. Communications largely gone. Roads, airports, streets, landmarks gone. Water, food systems, getting to someone's house, imagine, gone. Not going to be returned for a long time. Humanitarian aid is having a hard time as of right now. The information coming out is having a hard time getting out to people, having a hard time getting people into the aid. Remember, roads are destroyed. People are extremely isolated. And as time ticks on, this becomes more and more urgent. So today, with my two guests on the Safety Doc podcast, I am one blessed person to again have Katie Pechon on, and Herman and Shaylin to have both of you on, and to bring a perspective that I haven't had on the show before, which is rescue forces for persons with disabilities, bringing assets to persons with disabilities, and also the uniqueness of what might be the assets which are sought, such as a nebulizer or catheters or so forth, that typically everybody is thinking food, water, shelter, yes, and more. So I'd like to hear a little bit first. Well, Katie, I'll start with you, and then Herman and Shaylin, tell me about your work, and then also what you've been doing with the disaster relief in the Bahamas. So Katie, if you can start us off.
So I'm still with Triton Relief Group, as well as I'm always partnered up with Trach Mamas of Louisiana, who are a huge part of my relief work. Recently was made one of their board members. So I think I've shared with you in the past what Trach Mamas of Louisiana is. They got established during the 2016 flood. And in 2017, of course, Paul Timmons from Port Light Inclusive Disaster Strategies is how I became connected to the Disability Network. And over the years, that's always something that seems to be forgotten about. People don't have the capability to get to shelters on their own, to receive the aid and the supplies and the need like everyone else does. And there's always an issue every year, every state, about where we are going to relocate these people, how we're going to get them there, how we're going to make sure that they are okay. And you would be surprised with just the recent storm for Dorian. We were fighting with, and Herman and Shaylin know this, with Florida, because people with disabilities are turned away at general pop shelters. That's not okay.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So, so tell me more about that. I mean, because, well, that's illegal under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and
they were. Go ahead.
No, I talk about this when I work with school superintendents, with legislators, and everybody is aware of it. But again, it doesn't seem like it actually happens when a crisis strikes.
Every year, and so every year we face the same scenarios, and the questions are always the same. We experienced this situation last year. Why has it not been addressed? For example, which one? I mean, there's so many that come to mind. Florida actually requires people with disabilities to register prior to the storm. Or what we were told this time around was call 911 2 days before the storm.
Yeah. It doesn't make sense because, people are going to be moving too, right? That's the thing. If you're in one static location, maybe that makes some sense. But of course, in an evacuation, people every 5 minutes are somewhere else because they're moving. So yeah.
Rights are being violated.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You can only imagine the rights that are being violated for the Disability Network in the Bahamas.
Yeah.
If you take the United States and know what takes place during disasters, imagine, you can times it by 10, I'm sure.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Katie, I'm going to, and we're going to get into a set of questions where we'll be able to, bring more context to this. But Herman and Shaylin, tell me about the work that you've been doing, kind of in big picture, and then bring it down. And if you'd like to tell me how you got into the work that you're doing, I'd love to hear that story.
Thank you, David. We are originally we are activists. We are disability rights activists with ADAPT. It's an organization over 35 years old that has fought for the rights of people with disabilities across the nation, specifically to deinstitutionalize. We believe that all people with disabilities deserve the right to community services. And right now that is state by state. I've been doing this for over 15 years out of Philadelphia. And Chilling joined over a number of years ago. In 2017, while we were protesting outside a camp out at the Russell Building in D.C., fighting to save Medicaid and Obamacare, Paul Timmons, as Katie introduced earlier, came by, introduced himself, talked about the work he does, and it was a great contact. Then Maria struck USVI and Puerto Rico, Category 5 destruction, and he called us days later and asked us if we would be to go. And I am originally from Puerto Rico. I moved to Philadelphia in 2004 when I was 21, and the opportunity to go back and help my fellow disabled persons with disabilities in Puerto Rico. I use a wheelchair. I'm a quadriplegic myself, and we were 3 weeks deployed. For a week after Maria, we were able to empower the local disability organizations, meet in the table with FEMA on a weekly basis, and at the same time we were checking on shelters that they were meeting ADA standards. We were out in the interior of the island most of the time, truly making sure that those that would be reached the last got the assistance they needed. And as Katie was saying, water, food, everyone has these necessities. Many organizations, many NGOs do this. Nobody does disability needs. If I don't have a wheelchair, if in the heat, in the tropics, I'll start getting a decubitus ulcer very quickly. If I don't have the supplies that I need to keep my health, my independence, that disaster is going to make my life that much more difficult. We came back, after being deployed, and it was what a difficult and learning experience, knowing how bad the system is and how much work is needed. Now, most recently in May, I was elected as a United Nations disaster risk reduction focal point for persons with disabilities in the Americas. And through that work and the work that we do with Poor Light and Partnership, making sure that there are legislations in place to make sure that in disasters, our rights are protected and we get the assistance we need, as everyone else gets the assistance they need to remain the independence and come back to normalcy as quickly as possible.
Wow, that is, first of all, thank you for the work that you do. And, I've worked with persons with disabilities, students with disabilities for my entire career. I did not know that people doing the work that you're doing are out there. I thought this was all part of FEMA and part of broader organizations, and I didn't understand until you just actually shared this. And before, when I was developing the story and doing some research into your organizations and some of the work that you've done, I'm like, oh my goodness, wow, people have no idea. So right now, this is so important for people to understand, as you said, the keeping independence, and then, not only independence, but, your life needs, your necessities to maintain your life, for one, after a sentinel, event, a sentinel disaster, and then get that baseline established, and then move forward from there.
Thank you for tuning in to the Safety Doc Podcast with the nation's leading safety expert, Dr. David Parodi, author, radio show host, university instructor, researcher, expert witness, and consultant. Powerful testimonials. Dr. Parodi has a strong reputation as the go-to safety consultant, and he was still able to exceed our expectations. When we went looking for an expert in the field of crisis preparedness and prevention, David was the single person we pursued. Not easy stepping into the touchier subjects of life, but Dr. David pulls it off. Take a listen. Now, back to Dr. David Perodin and the Safety Doc Podcast.
My name is Shaylin. Herman really did say it all so well and really very similar what I would relay. But, one thing, my sister has a disability. I've been an advocate for her for my whole life, I would say. And I do remember, you mentioning being a special education teacher and being involved in connecting those avenues. I remember as a child, just her classrooms were always in the basement. And when you think about evacuations and emergency planning, how people are able to actually get from those classrooms out of harm's way and into safety. And we often find that as an issue in everyday life. If you go to a public building and you're on the 7th floor and the power goes out and you use a wheelchair, you're now stuck on the 7th floor. And then we also see that in disasters where people are then getting evacuated without their wheelchair because, it's life or death. But then they're not getting reunited with the equipment that they need in order to be independent in the community.
And let's not forget, we live in a country where, very sadly, mass shootings happen in school all the time. And if you must know, David, that evacuation processes and emergencies in schools have very little, if at all, for children with disabilities.
Yeah.
Right. And I wrote an article that was published in Kaplan Journal a couple months ago. And the article was about school districts exempting students with disabilities from safety drills and exercises because it was too much of a burden. Yeah. Now, of course, that's ridiculous, right? I don't agree with that. But this is saying, we're not going to do this because it takes too much time or the student becomes too dysregulated. And, I said, please let me write an article on this. And Kaplan said, yes. So I was pulling firsthand from people I was talking to. I was teaching a class, actually, a university class for aspiring special education directors, 20 students, and 5 of them said, this is our practice in our district. We give, parents the option or case managers the option to opt out students from drills. And I said, that's no. I said, well, there's no law that would allow that. Plus, even if there was a law, you would never want to do that, right? Because if anything happens, the students have to know how to respond. Plus, the people working with those students need to know how to interface with them and get them to safety. And not only here, but what if something happens at home, or, you're 25 years old and there's a fire in your apartment building and now you don't know what to do. You go into a closet or something. So it was just absolutely mind-boggling. And people would say, well, we have a form here that our district opt-out form. And I said, that doesn't mean anything. So I wrote the article and boiled it down. I did an interview with attorney James Sibley out of San Jose, disability rights attorney. Excellent. You can go back in my show, maybe 15 episodes. Jim talks about his adult son who has autism and how Jim was diligent in working with the district to make sure that his son received the same safety training, but then in a way that was applicable to his son. That they weren't exempting him from drills. So I see it in the schools in the States, and I can only imagine what is happening when we get to international disasters is that times 10 or times 100. So,
and that is sort of part of the stigma that we try to break down. That is sort of universal. We are the ones that are most forgotten. We are considered burdens to the that are coming to save others and whatnot. And, that is one thing that as the partnership in Portlight, we are disability-led organizations. People with disabilities, are the ones that are leading this organization and these efforts because we are the ones that know our lives best and can adapt to our surroundings and to the systems around us that are truly not accessible for everyone.
Yeah, Shaylin, that is a terrific way to frame that for everyone. That is spot on. let's get into the evacuation for the Bahamas. Well, first of all, a hurricane isn't like a tornado. It isn't like an earthquake. We have some lead time, with the hurricanes. So we knew this hurricane very early on was going to be significant. The impact it would have in the Bahamas wasn't, certain until a little bit closer, but definitely would be impacted. So tell me what you're perceiving, and anyone can answer this and kind of come in and scaffold the conversation. But, Katie, we were talking about $5,000 airplane or helicopter rides and out of the Bahamas. And if you're media, if you're with NBC, ABC, or big media, you definitely got one of those rides. But what was the problem or the problems with not getting an evacuation, or at least getting people from the smaller islands or the islands that didn't have robust infrastructure into like Nassau, I think Nassau, right? Where you have more of the robust infrastructure, at least a better chance, right? That's probably not the best option, but it's a better option. So what all fell apart because this kind of unfolded in slow motion before our eyes, and nothing happened of substantial nature?
If I may, yeah, but I do want you to go into the details specifically, but backtracking a little bit and learning what the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction Office has learned over the many years, most recently in their Sendai framework developed in 2015. It calls out, we're talking about the Bahamas as you opened up. It's a peninsula island nation, over 700 islands. Island nations don't have the capacity infrastructure that many strong, nations that have, a lot of natural resources that they can empower themselves. If you look at the GDP of the Bahamas, 85% of it goes into banking and much of it tourism. The local government, it has said we were not ready for this kind of catastrophe.
And then that's where I was going to go with. I think that if you look at how governors and FEMA and the American Red Cross are never prepared in every state that we've seen over and over, I think that this is no different. NEMA, which is their version of FEMA, the International Red Cross, and the Prime Minister were not prepared. They didn't heed any warnings. They didn't take any precautions and put anything into place. And I'm sorry, but I feel that if NEMA is a government agency, someone should have a contact or a reach out to FEMA. There should be some sort of partnership there, if they're both federal entities, to prepare ahead of time.
Right. Makes sense. So Herman, what's your perception of that? Because I mean, you're seeing this unfold, and the needs of people on the islands, and it's this matter of time where the gap is closing. The hurricane is going on onset. I guess, what were you doing? Who are the people you're contacting to try to get some movement of either people with medical needs or disabilities into the most secured environment that they could be, or what I guess frustrations happen? What did you experience with the evacuation? We were like,
Well, before Dorian impacted last Friday, we reached out to as many local or Bahamian organizations that we know focused on persons with disabilities. We reached out to the National Commission for Persons with Disabilities, the Civil Society for the Bahamas, and most recently, Every Child Counts, who helps mainly children with disabilities in Abaco. But at that time, we were able to establish a partnership with 242 Disability, which is a recognized and acclaimed disability-led organization in the Bahamas. which one that the National Commission, gave good word to later on as we've been talking this week. We reached out to also directly as a contact given to us by the chairman of the commission, NEMA Director Captain Russell, and a couple of his staffers. That was last Friday. We have yet to receive a contact back, and we understand as they are saying, it's about the infrastructure. They couldn't have been ready. They weren't ready before for this, and maybe not many places could say are ready for 180-mile winds for 2 days.
Correct.
Now, there is a thing to say that at least to my understanding, our president has not called Prime Minister Minnis yet. That would be a good start, and as a citizen, I wish that would happen. And surely, we know the U.S. Coast Guard is assisting there, and I'm gracious to know that I have fellow citizens that are helping. And always thank you to our, enlisted officers. But truly, as Kelly said, the United States has FEMA, and for all that it could be said badly, it does have billions available, if not in its budget, in the people they know. If they could start really collaborating with NEMA, it would surely make a big change. Now we know that initially SEDEMA, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, was going to lead the efforts. And today we learned from the American Red Cross that PAHO, the Pan American Health Organization, is leading the efforts towards health maintenance and persons with disabilities. We've reached out to them today. We learned last night from a fellow colleague that, this is someone that we trust, that we know, that is seeing what is coming in and what is coming out. And even though, yes, many, many supplies are coming in, none of it is disability related.
None.
But Katie, you have a few more details on that you want to share?
Is that from talking about speaking to Brandon last night? So NASA has become basically like a fortress. I don't know that anybody can really kind of get in and get out what they possibly need. Herman, you're going to have to help me trigger because we've had so many conversations. Brandon, go ahead. Tell me, refresh my memory, please.
Well, because now the government is attempting to set up the infrastructure for this disaster as we talk. Yesterday I heard that they're working on building a temporary shelter that could hold 4,000 people at a time, and that kind of system, persons with disabilities get very easily lost and not serviced. But because there is this disaster, there are individuals that are gouging fellow Bahamians.
Oh, yes. So I know that they were charging like $80 for water. I don't know if that was per bottle or 6-pack. There were like $500 and up charging for cab rides, as well as the $5,000 for flights. And you know me, I'm going to go to social media and call somebody out, which I did. I don't know if you saw my post. I'll read you word for word what I went ahead and did, because I like some answers. These people were, I think I shared the link, the hot link with you.
You did.
Still available. So last night I went to Facebook and tagged Zip Aviation. I need to speak with, and I'm going to butcher the owner's name. Did you see it, Herman?
I would have to make sure I get the name right.
I'm not even going to try to say it, David, because I'm going to butcher it. I need to speak with you immediately before I bring all kind of issues to the media that are taking place in the Bahamas on behalf of some of the aircrafts from your company. Now, it didn't get as much attention as I would have liked, but it's out there. I did directly message the owner that I can't pronounce his name. I said, I need you to contact me ASAP. I'm not sure if you are aware of the $4,500 charges being charged for flights by your company out of the Bahamas. Before I go to the media about this, I suggest you contact me. I am heavily involved in disaster relief and assistance, and I was told you may not be aware of this. But before the media is aware of it, I would like to speak to you. So I didn't get anything back, and that's fine. I went through the proper channels and contacted him first, but to protect the person who's sharing the information, because he was doing the right thing, he made the flight. It was only supposed to be a 30-minute flight. However, a friend of his was a few, maybe mile or 2 miles away, who had a broken leg and was starting to have some serious infection take place. He went to meet him and helped assist him to the helicopter. So his 30-minute flight, I think, went over about an hour and a half. When he returned back to base, he was told that he could no longer operate any flights because he was out of his 30-minute window and was just flying friends and family around. Now, he was saving people and not flying the media, and that was what they wanted. They wanted the media to have the flights.
And Katie, if I'm correct on this too, so this $4,500 charge, that was, if people simply went on the site and were clicking to inquire about that, a lot of times their credit card was already being charged for that 45 as soon as they put in some information. And then it was booked completely unrealistic also, right? It was like every hour, and realistically you weren't going to get these flights.
Correct.
And beyond how insane that is, that basically the wealthiest can buy their way to safety. Here we have someone who exercises humanitarian discretion and is basically then punished, for it. So
that also happened to me. That happened to me as well yesterday after I spoke to a pilot who actually is from the Lafayette area. The company he works for, they have an S-92, which is a very large helicopter, able to get a great deal of supplies as well as people in. They have been contracted out by this billionaire from the Bahamas.
Well, if I may, just so if anybody hears this and it is on a timely fashion, SIP Aviation, we understand that we've reached out to the owner, Itai Shoshani, and we're not saying, Itai, that you're doing this, but
Correct.
It's happening below you. You need to check on this. And to John Malone, we understand Mr. John Malone, billionaire owner of telecommunications, that he owns, we don't know if it's the full key or part of Solomon Key, very near Nassau, south of Abaco. We don't know if it is Mr. Malone who is, for lack of a better word at this time, hoarding resources for his services. But if you hear this, or if someone knows John Malone, I mean, we know that he is a grad and brick supporter of Yale. It would be great if he reaches out to you, David, so that you can let us know, or he can reach out to me directly at dart@disasterstrategies.com. I mean, dart@disasterstrategies.org. We would need assistance right now as much as possible. We are ready to supply DME, medical equipment, what the Bahamians with disabilities need to sustain their health, to be independent, and that the Bahamian government can adhere to its agreements to the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities.
Right.
Of the UN.
There's plenty of water, perishable foods, diapers. There's plenty of your typical immediate supplies that people automatically think of. Toiletries, all of those supplies are literally in hangars of helicopters and plane hangers in Florida. They're stacked there. I'll get you some pictures.
When did they get there? So let's move this on. This is perfect. So the staging of assets. When were assets ready in Fort Lauderdale or Miami, ready to go out? So if you would have had, means to transport them to Bahamas, when could that have happened?
I think that started probably in the middle of the week. Once, because you have to know that the storm finally moved, Sunday?
Out of there by Wednesday of this past week.
So, there was that issue of actually being able to get support in. So since then, most of the Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach, any type of hangar for aircraft has been loaded with supplies. And that's fine. Those are essential supplies that anyone can use daily. However, they're not disability supplies. They're not.
Let's go over disability supplies, just because people are listening and we're familiar with this, but when people are listening, they're understanding tangibles, a wheelchair, things like that. But help me to understand, help the audience to understand disability supplies, what that area of a warehouse might look like.
Well, it takes a larger I'm going to say wheelchair. It takes a larger aircraft as well to get in some of that, due to the fact that you can't fit heavy, wheelchairs and some of the other pallets on just your typical, 407 type helicopter. It would be nice if I could get another C-130 like I had to send 12 generators to Puerto Rico. That would be amazing because they could land in Freeport. But that's going to go back into the military, and I don't know that military assets are able to assist right now. So I haven't been able to secure or find a aircraft in that regard. Basically, some of your smaller planes and smaller helicopters, which then in turn means everything has to be broken down from pallets. Okay. Whereas we could just take a pallet, 2 pallets of the supplies, put it on a C-130 and get it there instead of having to break it all down.
Got it. So that takes time. Okay.
If I may, when, and again, that as Katie was saying, these are like the logistical. We are ready, and have the capacity to send in some of these things that people with disabilities need. Let's say you have a mobility disability, a wheelchair, a walker, a cane, even crutches. If you are someone who's blind or low vision, a walker, even if it has to be, height adjustable, you're talking about people who are, sit for a longer period of times or are laying in the bed. I mean, we're hearing about persons in the Bahamas who do not have a wheelchair, so they are in bed, bedridden. We're talking about the humidity level. It's over 100 for what we're experiencing in the United States, and the heat of the tropics. I know when I was in Puerto Rico, we helped an older couple and an older lady in her late 80s in 6 days developed 8 new decubitus ulcers. So the equipment, pads, the cleaning supplies for this type of equipment, some of us.
Go ahead.
Some of us, can't use the bathroom as others. So there are some urinary things like catheters and
urinary bags, lubricant, large blue absorbent pads, colostomy bags, silicone external catheters, urinary catheters, Ensure. I mean, these are not your typical things that people think about.
Right.
We do. And, I guess it's become so near and dear to my heart based off of my initial work with Trach Mamas and over the years of working with the partnership and Portlight, because I'm much more aware of these types of needs. I can get the typical immediate supplies, no problem. But for some reason, it is such an issue I should be able to pick up the phone. And I've talked over the last 3 days, David, with probably 10 to 12 pilots who their hands are almost tied, and they can confirm with me that there are none of these supplies are coming in.
Okay. So you said their hands are tied. Tell me more. What's tied is they can't come and receive these?
They're already contracted out to work with.
That's what I thought.
Another tied hand, if I may, like just one more, is that as we understand, for supplies to be able to move through customs, they need to be NEMA approved at this time. And we would need the collaboration of NEMA to be able to truly reach all the individuals we need.
And see, that's the difference between Herman and I, is I'm that person who's like, I'm ready to get on a helicopter and just go there.
Right.
I'll go without a passport and just say, you know what, lock me up. I dare you. Because there's some great organizations there currently. Samaritan's Purse, Hope for Hope Town, Harvest, Hope Food Bank, Habitat for Humanity, Arrow Bridge. These are some great organizations. However, none of them are associated with disabilities.
Even Team Rubicon, I must say.
Team Rubicon is another great one.
So what you're saying is, even if you could get the assets there for persons with disabilities, you really don't have people in the Bahamas that would know what the items necessarily are and how to prioritize and distribute them, right? You don't have that.
No.
Herman actually has been speaking daily with Howard, and I'll let you go ahead and...
Yeah, okay.
So we have if you will, understanding Bahamas is it's another country, right? With its sovereignty. Civil society organizations is a strong, much stronger than they are here in the United States. That being said, we have connected with many of the civil society organizations, and like what we call over here nonprofits, if you will, right?
Yes.
So we do have the connection, the capability. We have had identified needs in specifically coming out of Freeport. Now what we need is the permission or the collaboration with someone that has the permissions to be able to deliver the needs that have been identified. And we have 2 pallets ready to go.
So if it was approved, do you feel you could get the planes, the helicopters, the boats to transport? That they'd be available, or are they all consumed now through basically being bid out to the highest bidder? I guess, help me to understand that.
I had zero trouble in Hurricane Harvey getting air support. Zero. I spoke to one of our guys who actually assisted with a seizure med drop the request came through the hotline for Port Light and the partnership for a little boy that he needed his seizure meds. There was a mom in another town, got the meds to the helicopter pilot at the hangar. That helicopter pilot I spoke to today, and he's like, Katie, my hands are tied. I'm going to send you some contacts of mine. Make sure, mention my name. That's at this point, I'm talking to pilots I've already worked with, and they're saying, let me funnel this contact to you.
So when you say hands are tied, so there's 2 things. Are the hands tied because they're already committed to doing other projects, or are the hands tied because of this isn't NEMA approved, so they don't have the approval to intake
money
into the country?
On the table.
Okay. So the NEMA, Herman, as you indicated, that's something that could be done in 5 minutes with a presidential phone call, right? That could be, or a presidential order of saying, and this is something I wrote about extensively. I've studied it, social contract theory.
To be clear, you mean a phone call from our United States president to the prime minister of the Bahamas?
To the prime minister, requesting a stay on the customs procedures as we know them, to do some massive streamline of humanitarian aid through customs. That that couldn't be done through an executive order in literally minutes, right? Because it could be. Like, I know it could be.
Yes. Yes.
And so, and I studied extensively September 11, 2001. Ironically, tomorrow's September 11th. So the rescue in New York City, I worked with the City Department of Planning extensively through the documents. And one thing of the rescue in Lower Manhattan on September 11, 2001, the attacks in the World Trade Center, in 9 hours, in 9 hours, 500,000 people were rescued by boat from Lower Manhattan and taken off into New Jersey and so forth. But so the system developed, right? It developed because Admiral Loy of the Coast Guard said, anybody out there with a boat and you can come over and help us, do it. And they did it. So we're talking now kind of a parallel. Now it's different countries, but still, if people wanted to make this happen, it would happen. And people don't. So this is where I'm going to move us, because today, Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, said it, and I'm going to quote it. He said this today: the feds, not Florida, have a role to play in the Bahamian crisis. So that's what he said, basically saying, listen, we're going to wait for the feds to take the lead, and we're going to address our needs in Florida, but as far as the Bahamas, that's really country to country, and we're going to step back from that. So it's like, whoa, but here's something. This isn't the way that Florida has responded to international crises in the past. So Florida as a state has responded to international disasters much differently prior to what's happening right now. For example, in 2017, when Hurricane Maria left Puerto Rico devastated, then Governor Rick Scott used state resources to assist the U.S. territory, making 7 trips to the island and setting up welcome centers and airports in Orlando, Tampa, and Miami, as almost 400,000 island residents moved to the mainland. So it's not like this has never happened, right? It's not that Florida hasn't stepped up. It's not that the United States hasn't stepped up. But right now, and what's frustrating for me and growing throughout this interview is both of you, all three of you, okay, but both organizations are phenomenal. You're wonderful. You're doing everything. And now we have this bureaucracy breakdown, which is absolutely ridiculous, because by the day we have the likelihood of skin breakdown, ulcers, but then gangrene, and then cholera, and what else is going to happen, all because, and this is the part, and Katie, we talked about this a few nights ago, this doesn't even, not that this would make sense anyway as a political maneuver, because humanitarian need should never be above as a political ploy. But even looking at it from that perspective, this makes no sense. This is completely bipartisan, right? There's no one that would argue to not give relief to people in need. Like, logically, it doesn't make sense.
So the governor, so when I saw the governor's comment today, my head went all kind of ways. Does that mean all of the private airports or public airports that have been shuffling supplies in and out, or even people, is he going to put a halt on that now? That's where my head immediately went.
Yeah. So in my interpretation of this would be, if I am a rescuer, or if I'm in the capacity of facilitating a rescue, now I'm feeling I don't have that support behind me from the bureaucratic support isn't there. So this is something. So what happens? And give me your perspectives on this kind of individually. But what happens if it starts to slow down and you have the resources ready? You can connect and have them distribute it on the other side. Would you ever make a decision to say, we're just going in?
Yes.
We're going in because we're not going to let this go.
I will.
Herman, what people you work with? What if it happens right now that something unfolds in the next day or two and it becomes this big domestic political match, which is insane and ridiculous, right? Because we're talking about lives, right? This doesn't make sense, but this could actually, it seems like this is playing out, like politics is unfolding in its nastiest way. At what point do you do you make a decision to circumvent the conventional structures and almost do what happened on 9/11 and just say, we've got a boat, we know what we're doing, we're going to do it. And historically, history is with you, okay? And systems will develop, social contract theory and all of these things. Those things are in your favor. But at what point have you had these conversations with your organizations or behind the scenes of saying, if governments break down,
Got them.
what do we do? What do you do?
Well, I must answer this right. And the right answer is this. There are people there, as there are everywhere, that have diabetes. There are people there that need their dialysis. There are a number of needs that, there are people with tracheotomies that need their oxygen. There are a number of needs that have a life period. And we're getting near there.
Yes.
When we must act, we will.
Okay. Yeah. And certainly, I guess there's a lot of emotion that comes up, when we have this discussion, and I don't want to lead anyone down to a statement, where you're overreaching for your organization. I want people to understand, though, is that your organizations do have to have these conversations, because the fact when the government stalls for no good reason, right? But when the government stalls, the needs don't change of the people. And as time goes by and people are removed from their essential resources like dialysis, and we don't have electricity and resources and things like that, people will die, and infections and diseases will manifest and spread. So these are the kinds of conversations within organizations which they're so intense, and people just need to realize that you go from being a broker of resources to now really being the broker of last resort for life, and having to make those decisions. And I just want people to grapple with that when we have political posturing, that the organizations which are doing some of the greatest good, and you've mentioned a number of them, and plus you represent some of them, are put in these horrible situations where you have this ticking clock which doesn't change. And what rules do you abide by?
Well, and David, just after speaking to me, in 2016 when Louisiana had the flood, there were fire departments, there were police departments begging for help, begging for citizens to come out with their boats. And we did that. We came out, we deployed, we assisted. And so from 2016 to now, we've been able to create these relationships with the Florida State Police, with South Carolina State Police, with the governor of Texas, with the officials locally and statewide that we need to, so that when our need is requested, we've got those in. I just had some guys in South Carolina for Dorian that tried to get turned around, but see, I gave them my state police contact. So, that's in my blood, and it's kind of what Triton has done. We're going to get in and we're going to help. However, establishing the right contacts and making those connections, is something that we have tried to create and like to follow. This being a different country and knowing, I feel like my hands are tied, except now I'm at a point where I want to call one of my pilots and say, can you come get me on your helicopter and fly me in? So that I can go there and go Facebook Live for personal reasons and show everybody what really is going on.
A must-read for parents, teachers, and taxpayers. Dr. David Parodi has written the most honest book about the $3 billion school safety industrial complex. Attorney James Sibley proclaims, a brave demonstration of speaking truth to power. School of Errors rips the lid off the billion-dollar school safety industry. Using real-world examples of successful responses in desperate situations, David contrasts the expensive window dressings pitched to panic parents with the inexpensive and effective approaches proven to actually work. Read this book before you let your school waste another precious dollar on meaningless safety theater. Buy the international bestseller School of Errors, Rethinking School Safety in America, now at Barnes & Noble or Amazon.
So what's really going on? What are you, both organizations, how are you being informed of what's happening in the Bahamas? Tell me the stories. You don't have to tell me the names, but tell me the stories of what's happening right now. What's the latest intel that you're getting? How dire is this situation?
Well, we have been in constant daily touch, communications with our local colleague, Howard Bowe. He lives in Freeport. He's given statements. He shared things in his social media. That's why I say his name. He's a wheelchair user. He tells us there are no, as you know, the medical supplies that we need to keep our health are no longer. The small hospital that was in Freeport, inundated, all the supplies, any and all medical supplies that you can imagine, gone. And then, so we said earlier, they are not part of the aid that is being delivered. People will soon begin dying if, things like catheters that are right now making people's bladder busts. We're talking about some simple things,
right.
But
right.
that in a few days, since they haven't had these in a week, there's going to be another different type of catastrophe in their hands.
One thing that I also want to add as a problem that we're seeing on the grounds is that, everybody is being directed to send supplies to Nassau, and so everything is going there, and then it's not necessarily getting distributed to other islands, to people like Howard who are at home and need, catheters and a new wheelchair and things
right.
like to stay in his own home. And that's what we really focus on, is people living in the community in order to maintain their independence in the community.
One other situational observation that he shared is the hubs. I saw it myself in Puerto Rico with the Red Cross. He tells us that he's seeing, distribution hubs being set up. People with wheelchairs that have mobility issues, older folks cannot get to these distribution hubs.
Okay.
So please, Katie, I think you had something to add.
No, it's just I'm listening to this, and all of these supplies and needs being sent to Nassau. Look at all of the water that was left in Puerto Rico after. I mean, how many pallets of, I can't even remember, but the fact of the matter is there were probably people who needed that water. However, it was not distributed. So our focus has been to not get supplies into Nassau. It's been Freeport. Because I can promise you, if I were there in Nassau, the video footage I would get would probably be disgusting for people to see of the supplies just sitting.
Wow. So I want to just put a little context to this. So we're talking about people with disabilities, and so we have 400,000 people total in the Bahamas. And if we take a conservative number of just general populations of people with disabilities, so anywhere between 50 and 70,000 people, and that doesn't include people necessarily who might be elderly, and just in general might not be as able to access, might fatigue easier and things like that. So this, let's put a number to this. This isn't 5,000 people. 50 to 70,000 people. I just want to put that out to give some context, because I think people are thinking, well, is this like a group of people in one area, and then
it's not a club.
So it is substantial.
So let's think about that. Those that had a disability, we could be, conservative and say 2% of that number, 5,000 or so. Then you add your older population. Let's add another 5,000 to that. You add those that acquired at least a temporary disability now, or injuries after the storm. I can tell you that in Puerto Rico, I met, a senior person, but, young senior, went out a couple of days after Maria had passed cleaning, fell and dislocated two shoulders. And then because of having osteoporosis, the local hospital didn't have the capability to snap them back in place. She was now with dislocated shoulders for 3 months.
Both of them.
And her 90-year-old mother when seeing her daughter fell, went to assist her, all being wet and whatnot, fell and broke her wrist. So this type of story just really, it just continues and continues. Right. Then, if I may add, I would dare say all 50,000 people now at least have gained a traumatic experience. I mean, the still, as Dorian, Category 1 approached my fellows in Puerto Rico and USPI, both of their stories were very similar in the fear of what could happen again.
The PTSD.
Yeah, that's.
And
thank you.
I could speak on that, because David, when a hurricane is approaching, I've got all of my guys in boats who are calling me, Pechon, we're ready to stand by and deploy. And so I'm so grateful of having them reach out to me and telling me they're on standby. However, I suffer PTSD from the traumatic experiences of hearing my guys in boats tell me they can't get to someone, they need a helicopter. So the fear of everything I've already experienced immediately kicks in, and I myself kind of go into a frenzy of just being fearful.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for bringing that up. Herman, 2 points, and Katie. One is acquired disability, right? Because any injuries that happen as a result of the hurricane, any physical injuries that happen as a result, or now we're going to have, potential illnesses striking people, injuries, disease, things like that, urinary tract infections because not sufficient water, just things like that. But everybody is impacted by this absolutely devastating event of nature, the hurricane, and the psychological trauma that has. It's, I wrote about it called the Taurus, T-O-R-U-S, Taurus. The Taurus means every day we kind of expect self-similarity. Like today is going to be pretty similar to yesterday. Yesterday is pretty similar to the day before. But when you have something like a Hurricane Dorian slam down on you for 48 hours, and you know that it's coming, right? In all of this, that totally wipes out your sense of self-similarity and rockets you into the state of chaos where you don't have a baseline, you don't know what's going on, and now you can't return to your pre-event baseline because when you open up the door, everything is destroyed, right? Everything is gone, and in addition to the whole psychological trauma that now someone is saying, oh, there's another tropical depression, and you're just fearful. So it's hard for you to frame just what's happening around you. So this devastation, so let me put this out there. So how do the psychological needs of people get met, or what's your perspective on that, or what are attempts to do that?
Are the right people in the right positions to help assist with that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I have no idea. But is it bringing counselors? Are there?
For example,
Well,
I'll share a story that was a pilot shared with me today. It's wonderful that the military is out there helping in whatever way they're helping. I'm not sure, but I think that because of the devastation, they are being a little more careless than they probably should be. And today, one of my pilots watched the military, I guess, probably flying too low or not being as cautious as typical, blew what was left of a house down, and a 2x4 hit someone in the head and killed them.
Oh my goodness.
So are the right people in the right positions to help in the right way?
And absolutely. And to add, to those that continue to see new events that will cause trauma, PTSD has a long history, right? The symptoms of PTSD are the symptoms of shell shock. For those of us that were old enough to remember that, a trauma is a trauma. As humans, what we need to be able to cope with trauma is trauma. So there are counselors that specialize in this. The systems exist. I will add that. And later on, I'm sure we'll talk again, David. But in the United States, we are working on a federal piece of legislation called the Disaster Relief Medicaid Act. Medicaid is a system that you cannot take with you across states, and this legislation will change that, and anyone that qualifies for Medicaid will be able to keep what they had or just be able to qualify for it in their new state if they have to evacuate. And in there, we have specified that all people that experience a catastrophe need, this type of counseling, and family members. Because as Katie's saying, she hears the story, family members, there is a different trauma that goes on from those of us hearing and assisting those directly affected.
Yeah, I can't, the PTSD that I've got is nothing compared to the PTSD that the folks in the Bahamas who have weathered this storm are going to experience. So it's just, every year I get tongue-tied because yet again, somebody said to me, I said, we've never seen this kind of devastation before. And they said, Katie, you're wrong. We absolutely have. Every year it's a different devastation that we've never seen. So it's not that you haven't seen this before. You have, just maybe not on this level. And I took that and really thought about it because we have experienced this. Has it been in another country? No. But I think over the years, the organizations that are continuously involved in making the relief efforts happen are not, we're not able to assist. And it's so disturbing.
Yeah. Well, Katie, thanks for sharing that. And again, there are pieces of information that I'm writing down. I want to make sure I touch on. So, Herman, you mentioned that you're working with legislators on what would be the Disaster Relief Medicaid Act, and as you describe this, makes perfect sense because Katie, you talked about whether it be Louisiana, Texas, Florida, but people moving not only throughout their state but into different states because of hurricanes, right? And I had no idea, right? I had no idea. I just had never thought about it that your Medicaid from Florida, if you need to relocate into, northern Alabama, whatever it is for a period of time, that now you have an issue because your Medicaid is through Florida and it doesn't cross state borders. I remember I was teaching a student in a qualitative statistics class. I'm a professor, and she was in Louisiana during Hurricane Katrina, and she needed to evacuate. And the university was willing to, say, we can refund the class for you. That's not a problem, right? And she said, no, I want to continue to take the class. I just don't know where I'm going to be tomorrow. And I was her instructor, and I said, and there was an article about this. Her name was Katie. Also, I forget what her name was. But, the newspaper did an article about this because it was so phenomenal. And she said, it was so important for me to keep going in this class because that was that was my Taurus, right? That's my self-similarity, my normalcy. Like I know the class will be there if I can find some kind of Wi-Fi, someone's computer and log in through some system, or if I can call you. And I'm like, if you're up for this, I'll accommodate you in any way that I can to make this happen. If you can find, phone, and this was back, when internet wasn't as robust as it is today. And I'll never forget how much that meant to her at the end. And she was getting things done. And she said, I can't sleep in the shelter. Like, it's just so unusual for me, right? I just can't, and all the trauma of moving. And I don't know if my house is still there. I don't know if all of this, neighbors, things like that. But she was able, she used this class, and she said, this is what I burn my energy on right now. And she was phenomenal, did like 3 times the work of anyone else because this was so important. But it was an early lesson for me of I'm talking to her, and she's also like, I have no idea when I come back. And she sent pictures, like the school that she taught at was gone. It was just a concrete slab. It was completely gone when she eventually returned weeks later. So this disaster, I'm meeting with one of our state legislators on Friday. He sought me out so we're having a meeting, and I want to run this Disaster Relief Medicaid Act just to see if he is apprised of this. Okay, so so we know counseling. I would assume churches and looking for the psychological support systems for people. So okay, right now we kind of catch up with where we're at. We talked about the assets that are needed. The assets are staged. They're ready to go. Herman, you talked about who's in charge, and we also know right now we have from the U.S. we don't really have a firm commitment from a national level, and definitely from a state level, we have a pullback from what's typically a position of offering aid. We have a pullback position from Florida.
Well, David, this is a question that I think all of us have kind of had, considering the devastation that's taken place. Why hasn't, if the president doesn't want to get involved in as deep as he should, why hasn't some sort of order been put into place where passports and visas are lifted? Because I don't know if we're able to follow up with this, but from a Facebook post that I shared with our group the other night, there was a pilot who had some people that he brought into Florida. The pilot was, I think, put into jail, but then released with his plane. But a 15-year-old girl was put into jail. I don't know what came of that because I think we maybe handed it off to Becky. I'm not sure.
So two parts to the story that Katie is mentioning. We are following through the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties in DHS to this specific case. We will make sure that we get an answer. Then this morning, I saw a White House press conference where DHS personnel stated that the United States has received two cruise ships and processed thousands of people, and that we would welcome people even without their paper if they are seeking help. We did learn this afternoon on a call from a colleague in the American Red Cross that about 40 or 50 people from the Bahamas were in one of their shelters, and today their county came in and said, well, we're taking these people and putting them up in a hotel for a week. Mm-hmm. We inquired what is going to be the process after the week, like where are these people going? And at this point, she shared that she didn't know. We are happy that at least we're having some information coming down, because what we hear on the news is evidently different from what we hear from our partners.
And Brandon, the contact I made, who is from Abaco but lives in Texas, he has to get back to work September 14th. So what I'm going to help him with, and Todd's helping as well, his parents want to get out of Nassau. Their house in Abaco is gone. But is there going to be some red tape when they cross into the United States? They're saying no. Who's going to assure that? His parents are older. He has the capability to fly them himself out back into Texas. But what happens if he gets to that point where then his parents are locked up? I'll go to the Bahamas in a heartbeat without a passport, and they can gladly lock me up, and then y'all can do this and it will go viral. But what about people who are legal, trying to get their family members out?
Right. So obviously the passport, and that has been stated in the media that the president has stated that we need to ensure. I'm saying on statements that the president has had of identifying who's coming in and out of the country from the Bahamas. Now, I will say, that's ridiculous, right? Because this is humanitarian aid, and this is a time of far beyond playing politics. And I think, Katie, we've talked about this before, but I think there's solutions to this. As someone who has studied, who has written about on a scholarly level, doctoral level, about social contract theory, about government, about law, few things. One is we could suspend for a temporary time span the depth of what we have for customs and what we have.
Why not?
For coming. That could be done. The other thing is temporary autonomous zones, TAZs. So TAZs are pretty common all over the world at different times. Temporary autonomous zone happened on 9/11 in that harbor for 9 hours. A system just kind of developed and it worked. Outside of a government regulation and government procedures putting it together. There was no handbook for how to rescue 500,000 people in 9 hours.
There never is.
Right. There never is. So part of it needs to be ultimately, and I believe this, FEMA needs to change fundamentally to from what it is to being a resource brokering in asset. It needs to identify, inventory the assets, where the assets are, make sure there's a place for the assets, and then the transport of the assets. And then we have this whole structure that liberates civilian rescue forces, nonprofits, Triton Relief, Cajun Navy Relief, and so on, to do the work that they need to do without having to have all of these bureaucracy checklists that they have to go through. And that simply needs to happen. The hand will be forced, I think, at some point. The civilian rescue forces, this is very interesting. In 2011, there's many research points. I presented on public television about this. Many research points, at least in the United States, that said we got to a point when during a Sentinel event, hurricane, F5 tornado hits a town like Joplin, Missouri, 50,000 people and destroys it. People are going to Facebook, they're going to WhatsApp, they're going to Messenger, they're going to
social media.
Yeah, so social media for the rescues to these private organizations and the private companies, but then they're interfacing with the nonprofits such as Cajun Navy Relief, and you're interfacing then, Katie, with whoever you have to interface with to have that boater make contact with that site. We're also seeing. So I interviewed Giles Rice Jones of the Chief Marketing Officer for the company What Three Words. Are you familiar with What Three Words? By the way, they're out of London. So What Three Words is the United Nations uses What Three Words right now. It's a geo-addressing company. They took the entire surface of the Earth and they put it out into 3 meter by 3 meter squares. And each one has a 3-word address. So this one right here could be connection, coffee, health, like right where I'm sitting. It's not, but let's say it is. And again, I did a presentation on public television about this, and I gave my exact location. But here's what's happening in Denmark and Sweden and Great Britain right now. And also that United Nations is using this rescue model. It's in all of the Mercedes-Benz vehicles. Will be in the United States and Ford Motor Vehicles as their default GPS system next year. This is incredibly accurate, right? So right now in the Bahamas, where landmarks are gone, and 75% of the world is an address anyway. It doesn't have an address.
Oh.
But you can identify exactly where the spot is, and it's much more precise, even if it changes, like whatever building was there is gone, what's there 10 years from now is gone. So when you dispatch rescue, or when you have someone on the other end who says, I have no idea where I am, and they'll say, okay, download the app, whatever, and here the app is, and okay, we know exactly where you are.
Yeah.
So this is something that is sweeping right now, and it's interesting because the bureaucracy I see with school districts is when I meet with school districts, and Friday when I meet with our state legislators, I'm going to say, you know what, the whole response that we have for school safety in Wisconsin, we have 421 school districts where I'm at, and they all have their own safety plans, how they would evacuate if something happened. And we've had tornadoes that hit the state. We had an F5 destroy one of our towns outside of Madison in 1984. Destroyed it, just similar to what the scenes we're seeing out of the Bahamas. Madison, our state capital. So, but you're going to use this geo addressing. You're going to say, in the moment, here's where you need to go to, and you're going to stage to that place versus saying, we're going to stage to the church or the warehouse 2 blocks away, which might not be there, and that might already be in your perimeter. So these are things which are coming on the scene, but they're also not government controlled. And what I find a lot is people in the government are very reluctant to hand over more of the social contract into civilian rescue forces, into social media, into like a What Three Words type app. It needs to happen. And it's this whole give and take.
If I may add to know that I have been following that over the last few years. It'll expand over the 36 satellites that track GPS. This will definitely help in evacuation and search and rescue. It's just coming out next year, as David shared. But to your other point, David, as it relates to empowering the civic societies, nonprofits in the community, we do have a companion bill to DRMA. It's called READI, REAADI. That's REAADI for disasters. These are 2 pieces of federal legislation, and we will send you after this.
Thank you.
All the information in relation. This specific bill does mainly two things. One, it will open new sources of money just to be able to empower nonprofits to be able to help in the planning, evacuation, assessment, and build back better. Things like centers for independent living that help and work directly with people with disabilities and other such nonprofits, and not go through the FEMA and sometimes Red Cross bureaucracy. The other thing that piece of legislation does is will create a number of bodies as national projects, if you will, some of them another commission within FEMA that will evaluate how badly the money has been spent in the last few years. I mean, and just today, by the way, these bodies will be mainly composed of persons with disabilities. And we know that today, we're hearing how FEMA, the deputy director of Region 2, was just scheming money out of Puerto Rico. So this is the kind of things that we hope that once these pieces of legislation pass, the system will be better prepared for those that need it, and we can evaluate and really start rebuilding our broken system.
Thank you for tuning in to the Safety Doc Podcast. with the nation's leading safety expert, Dr. David Parodin. Author, radio show host, university instructor, researcher, expert witness, and consultant. Powerful testimonials. Dr. Parodin has a strong reputation as the go-to safety consultant, and he was still able to exceed our expectations. When we went looking for an expert in the field of crisis preparedness and prevention, David was the single person we pursued. Not easy stepping into the touchier subjects of life, but Dr. David pulls it off. Take a listen. Now, back to Dr. David Parodin and the Safety Doc Podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, thank you. I mean, you're educating me and my audience and the ripple effect this is going to have, because knowledge is what's needed, and knowledge is what's going to move us forward.
When Hurricane Barry, actually Thunderstorm Barry is what we jokingly call it, was approaching Louisiana, we were all on a call. And one of my biggest things was to find out the shelters that were accessible for people with disabilities. Well, I kind of caused a big ruckus because I had one of my dispatchers reach out through an email to the Governor's Homeland Security Office, and they provided us a list of accessible shelters for disabilities. So I brought that up on the call. Well, Amy Dawson, she's just amazing. I'm being very sarcastic. She was infuriated because I basically shared it with Marcy Roth, and I said, are these real? Because when we have to deploy boats, they need to know where these people, anyone has to go, and it's best suitable for them. So when a disaster is approaching, I should be able to have a list of shelters that are accessible for people with disabilities. But no state can provide that. Florida couldn't even do it for Dorian.
Right. And that's a frustrating part too, because 911, for example, dial 911. Well, the reality is, in studying instant command systems and national instant management systems, and working with Fred Varian, who is one of the best in the country with instant command systems for 45 years, saying it's kind of a system that is no longer functional, right? We've moved beyond that with social media and with apps, and so to stake people to these antiquated systems is ineffective. And then, as you said, Katie, how embarrassing is it to not be able to, at a state or county level, to say, here are our sites for
the state has
shelter, right? Shelter resources. Like, how do you not know that? Yeah, it's mandated under the ADA. I've got the different legislation points because I bring those forward in my classes, and it is in part of it. So what happens, right, is we have turnover. So these positions, that's one thing I learned in my role as a school administrator when I'm working with county emergency management systems. In a year, that position might change leadership twice, right, or if not more. So you suddenly lose your connection. So even if you have this meeting and you get to know people 3, 4, 5 months from now, the stakeholders have changed. They've turned over. So what you need is redundancy. You need to train many people. You need to know many people in different organizations. So instead of me just knowing, one person in Triton Relief, I want to know 3, 4 people in case, you're not there, or, 2 people aren't there.
That will never happen.
Right. So, and the other part is an induction process. Government is horrible at induction. I know it because I was part of this for so many years, and I teach this. I have this specifically laid out for my superintendents all day Saturday, I'll be in a course. And one of the first things is, how do we onboard knowledge? People that come into our system, how do we let them know the way that we do things around here? Because for it's one thing, right, if we're figuring out how we run the lunch lunchroom and the time that classes are coming down and stuff like that, right? That's functional stuff. But if we're trying to figure out how we're managing our food allergies or how we're managing our students with type 1 diabetes, like that's life-threatening, right? We have to onboard people very fast in that. You can't wait until the middle of October to get your staff trained about, oh yeah, this student has a high RAST score or likelihood of a severe reaction, and here's your training on, an EpiPen. So it's this whole thing in government where because of the turnover and people are termed and they get voted out and things like that in different positions, different people get then appointed to lead committees. There's a really bad handoff of a baton. And it's a point where people don't even know the baton exists. Like people are like, I talked to someone once and I said, well, you're chair of what committee? And he was like, what? Where did you find that? I'm like, it's on the website. And he's like, no, I should have been off that in 2018. I'm like, well, it still lists you. So you got a hold of the person who was in charge of that. And they hadn't appointed someone yet to replace him. So he wasn't. So in the meantime, nothing was done. So as we get to wrap up, I mean, you've been very generous with your time. Herman, tell me, so you talked about the REAAME, the bill for disasters. What does the bill have for induction, or so as the people turn over or in this that still has fidelity and reliability in it, inter-rater reliability, that it may be this great system, but again, how do people stay trained? And is that built in? I'm guessing you probably did think of it as you put this together of how you make sure that people are on board it so they can go right to the task.
Thank you, David. The name is Ready. And I'll let Shaylin spell it out because she's the best at it.
It's READI, REAADI. So that stands for Real Emergency Access for Aging and Disability Inclusion. Or I'm sorry, yes, Disability Inclusion for Disasters Act. And you can see why it's a difficult name to slur out there.
Yeah, no, the difficult was my handwriting. You gave it to me correct the first time, so I'm sorry. But thank you for that, and thanks for sending it. But yeah, tell me about because this has to be significant, right? This is life and death. This is complex stuff. How are you putting your information structure so people can access and plug into it, and it's not foreign to them when a crisis hits?
So for us, first, from our perspective, is it that all the information is accessible in all fashions, that we're talking about people who are low or blind can access it in different manners, that it is accessible, that the people that use all digital and needed screen reader, that it is compatible, and that is a big issue, that if information is being shared verbally, that there is sign language, and so that baseline. But now to your specific question, the bill does have information about directing early on, the point about why we are struggling right now, why we struggle in every disaster, is because we start dealing with it as the disaster comes. So right. This piece of legislation, directs HHS to begin preparations now in blue skies, to begin establishing a home care core for, home care. I am someone that if I don't have an attendant to help me out of the bed and help me get dressed, I will be in trouble, to say the least. So that is one piece. But more importantly, and how do we empower individuals? One, it's about funding, right? We need to be able to have a place to meet, right? To be able to have, when we are talking about, you're in Wisconsin, I'm not sure what part of Wisconsin you're in, but if you go out of the city, sometimes transportation is very difficult if you don't have your own vehicle, right? So providing that, and now coming together, bringing, all the involved parties emergency management agencies and first responders, talking about American Red Cross and Centers for Independent Living with their consumers to talk about a cross-sectoral conversation on what works best for us during blue skies, right? Doing these processes so when the disaster comes, we're all ready. And as Katie was establishing very well earlier, what works, if we can pass on one lesson learned, is prepare ahead. Talk about it, get the relationship established in blue skies. Now, when the disasters come, we can all connect and deal with this effectively.
Right. Well, and Herman, that is also the way when I've communicated, I think, with the best professionals for disaster readiness. They say that in schools, for example, let's run our tabletop exercises, or let's talk about, not necessarily we have to do a full simulation, right? But let's talk about if this happened, what we would do, who would be the people we put in charge of different things. And so what you're saying, yeah.
I want to add, it's critical to involve those communities that would be affected.
Right.
People, leaders, people living in these communities, different sectors of this community, LGBT, as much as people with disabilities and different disabilities. I cannot speak much for the needs of someone who is autistic, but I'll remember I'll remember, and I'll call one of my autistic friends to say, what would you need as a baseline? And as Katie was saying, every disaster is its own disaster. If you've seen one disaster, you've seen one disaster.
Right.
And learning from those local individuals, the local organizations, the local people involved, it's really one of the more important things to be doing this right. So
I agree with everything that you're saying. I want to introduce a story. When I was working with the Wisconsin School for the Blind, we were exploring apps to inform students if the school will be in a lockout. That's when the doors are locked. And we had a lot of students who went to a 2-year campus, which was a few blocks from the camp. So the campus I worked on was 1 million square feet. It was all connected through hallways and the dorms. So students lived there during the week. It was their home. But students were out in the community for employment, for doing orientation mobility, learning different routes, the bus system, and so forth in the community. But so we had an app. We were trying different apps, and so I met with students, and the vendor was going through this app, and I'll never forget the students were saying, well, some students had low vision, other students are blind. And the students who are blind said, I can't access this, like the voiceover doesn't work. And the vendor said, oh, that's okay. You can magnify the screen. And I said, whoa, like, no, they're blind. Like this, you designed this without voiceover. So I talked to him afterwards and I said, okay, like when you developed this, you needed to have people who are representative of your users. So whether it be people who are blind, people hearing impaired, people with autism, learning disability, whatever, that you would have trial this, right? And then you'd learn, okay, right away, oh, we don't have accessibility, and it should be built universally accessible. But anyway, so that was absolutely insane. We spend $3 billion a year on school safety. We develop all kinds of things, and they usually go through, they get conceived and they get manufactured. They're never with the users, whether that be students with disabilities or students without disabilities, or any of the users. And so we don't test things, and there isn't any law that makes us do that. And here we see something else, happening. We have systems that are put in place without ever thinking about the people who actually use those systems, right? How crazy is that? So what you're talking about, Herman, with Ready is right there. I mean, having universal design for access designed into the system. So you're not retrofitting, because if you're retrofitting, that usually is not intuitive to try to retrofit a system, so it's designing it from the start. So I'm excited, and anything I can do to contribute to this, please let me know. And you talked about now in blue skies. That's a term I will forever use after this conversation today, because that is a term perfectly to talk about now in blue skies, right? When things are settled, when we're in our Taurus and we're not having to deal with chaos, let's figure out, okay, if this happened, how would we do this? And the thing is, this is science proven. We know that if people are told in advance and work through things, they typically handle them very well, even though they have to be dynamic and adjust to whatever the context and situation is that unfolds. They handle it really, really well if you tell them ahead of time, hey, like communications is probably going to go down. It's going to be, and this is how it's going to look and unfold. But it's that step that we don't do, right? We have the binder. We have, as a colleague of mine calls it, app in a can. Basically, it's like, go to the app and the app will tell you what to do. Well, come on. Like, that's ridiculous, right? So you are doing so much on a level that is going to start to adjust the structures, which will just be more inclusive and more intelligent, because we're operating off of really old, non-inclusive models, just flat out.
Shay are a power couple.
What was that?
I said Herman and Shaylin are really a power couple, and it's people get involved in relief work, and sometimes when the dust settles, they're gone because they think everything's over. And it's nice to be able to work with people who their hearts are at the right places and they are going to get it done no matter what. And they definitely, that's them for sure.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Katie. And so are you, I must say.
Katie, I'll never forget, you were sharing pictures of some of the work that you did, and you had one set of pictures where you were in a house and you're removing drywall and helping that person, putting in new drywall. So you got the mask on and all of that stuff. And again, like, people are like, oh, like, I thought the disaster relief was kind of, get people out of their house, get people into a setting, get the assets there, and then people are gone. And it's like, in some cases, but not at all in the work that you're doing. And, Herman and Shaylin, the work that you're doing is seeing people through to get them back to a stable Taurus or a stable self-similarity, where then they can function and move forward with their lives, which is so admirable. I mean, I mean, you're just doing such wonderful work. Wonderful people.
I've tried to involve myself a little more in every aspect of disaster relief as the years go on, because while boat rescues are one area and running supplies are another, gutting homes, people think once the water has subsided, oh, everything's fine and dandy. No, because FEMA's not coming in to help these people. So, getting involved with gutting homes, and then, my involvement with Trach Mamas over the years has now led me to have the involvement of the Disability Network that so many are so uninformed about. So I try to make sure I have a little bit of involvement as much as I can, because it's so much more than just a hurricane coming through, and people do not understand it. They just don't.
And, David, thank you for speaking with us and sharing our message, because truly it is something that is not covered often. And then when it is, we are often tokenized and viewed as inspiration porn, as we call it in the disability community. Right. And we are the leaders, we are the leaders here in these efforts. And the partnership in Port Light are the only disability-led organization in the United States focused solely on disability and disaster relief efforts before, during, and after disasters. And it's just incredible to see that there really is not a lot of people doing this similar work. And the message is not getting far and wide enough, that we're not always getting at the right tables that we need to get at, because our message is not getting to where it needs to go. So I really appreciate you taking the time, and we're happy that we've been able to take your time tonight as well, and hopefully can do more in the future. We certainly always have more to share, and are excited that you are excited about the READY Act and the Disaster Relief Medicaid Act.
And to all the listeners that tune in, thank you all.
And I hope we made Marcy and Paul proud.
I think so. Marcy Roth is the CEO of the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies, who is our operational and advocacy leader. And Portlight Inclusive Disaster Strategies, the president, Paul Timmons, it's a leader in disaster. They helped him during Haiti, specifically with persons with disabilities, and also right after the Iraq War.
They are two of the most incredible people I've met through this. And Marcy is a little firecracker who used to work for FEMA. She spent about 8 to 10 years with FEMA.
Okay.
So it's really nice when we're all on a conference call and she calls them out to see if they're on the line or if they're lurkers.
Yeah.
But
yes, Marcy started the FEMA's Office of Disability Integration and Coordination back in Obama's administration, and left after Obama. And so she really built that infrastructure and that network, from the ground up, and really created a robust department specifically for people with disabilities in disasters. And unfortunately, we have to say in the past few years that since we've seen that role being taken over by somebody else, that department has significantly diminished and has really changed in its structure and how they operate. And we do see that effect trickling down to the disability community not being served fully and accessibly throughout disasters.
Just a simple point to that. Now, as of a few months ago, but in effect as of a couple of years ago, if you're a person with a disability, there is this title that exists in FEMA. It's a disability and integration coordinator. At this point, before under Marcy Roth's leadership, they would help individual. They would help the cadre to understand what disability is, but also individuals in the ground with disabilities on the application process and all that red tape. As of now, and you could collaborate this online, Linda Mastretta, the current director, says that no longer the coordinators will work directly with individuals. They'll give an orientation as the cadre of 3,000 people are going to head out of disability needs.
Right. That's so insufficient and so uninformed to adopt that approach.
Just see such a dismantlement of that department that it's really disheartening and really discouraging for our community that we've been really trying at all angles to work together and really actually work with FEMA and collaborate with our efforts. And we're just struggling to get through that at the moment. And, I just like to throw out that there 2 to 4 times, people with disabilities are 2 to 4 times more likely to be injured or die during or after a disaster. 1 in 4 people are a person with a disability. You either have a disability, you know somebody with a disability, you grow old enough to have a disability, or you never know what happens when you walk out the door tomorrow, and could become a person with a disability yourself. So, we are so interwoven in our communities, and just really need to be sure that we're represented and that there's nothing about us without us throughout the whole process.
How can people support the work that you're doing?
They at this point, please visit our website, portlight.org, and you can also visit and donate and be informed there. Not only donations are always needed. Being informed, knowing what's going on, also empowers people on to react. I would also encourage people to visit our great partner, which I'm also a board member of, Trach Mamas, and Katie may share their website in a moment, and also, as she's a board member too, but also if you are a person with a disability and you want to get involved, look for the Center for Independent Living in your area. I also want to give a shout out to the National Council of Independent Living, which are great collaborators on the work we do. And lastly, again, Trach Mama puts it together, Triton takes it, and Shailen and I out there as first responders deliver it. Why don't you close? Yeah,
I also just want to add for the legislative bills that we were speaking about, you can learn more about them and how to take action with them at ready, REAADI.com.
And who delivers us is Katie. Katie, why don't you close us out and deliver that?
Thank you, David, for having me, as always, more so for having Herman and Shailen, because they've been a huge backbone of the Bahamas relief. And I'm not going anywhere. I'm probably the one person that's always going to cause a fuss and make things known and stir the pot a little, because I think sometimes it's the only way to get the point across and the word out to the people who need to understand what's really going on. So like Herman said, I am now one of the board members of Trach Mamas, extremely proud to be there. You can go to trachmamas.org, TRACH mamas.org. Jessica, she's amazing, and I'm now the vice president of tritonrelief.org. So we're not going anywhere. I'm still going to be causing a fuss, and I'm still going to, continue this. And every year it's going to be a new learning experience.
This has been the Safety Doc Podcast with author, radio show host, and leading safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin. Remember to check back each week for the latest, best, and most bizarre practices in safety preparation and crisis response. You can find Dr. Perrodin on Twitter at SafetyPhD. And remember, the truth will keep you safe.